In the quiet evening of August 24, 2021, a maintenance worker in southwest Baltimore opened the door of a third-floor apartment. What he found inside silenced even the most seasoned officers. The air was heavy, a smell no one forgets. Inside, the lifeless bodies of two children just 6 and 8 years old were left alone for days. Their mother Jamerria Hall was found hours later, calmly riding in the back of an Uber. When questioned, she didn't hesitate. She admitted everything. Before we begin, if you care about true stories that matter, stories that reflect the cracks in our society, please hit the subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and turn on the notification bell. Now let's begin. Jamerria Hall was a name most people in Baltimore had never heard until the headlines forced it into public memory. By the time her story reached the news, the damage had already been done. She was in her late 20s in 2021. A single mother living in a modest apartment complex on Edmondson Avenue, a part of the city that sees its share of struggle. Neighbors say she mostly kept to herself. Quiet. Reserved. Some remembered seeing her walk to the corner store with her kids. Others didn't even know she had children. But she did. 2 of them. Davin, age 8, smart, energetic, always asking questions. And Neria, age 6, shy, gentle, always holding her brother's hand. Jamerria raised them alone. There was no mention of a father figure involved in their daily life. Custody battles weren't public, but sources later confirmed the father had no contact and didn't contest custody. She was left with the full responsibility of raising her children physically, financially, and emotionally. There were no job listings attached to her name. No workplace colleagues who remembered her. If she had employment, it wasn't stable. The weight of survival was real. Rent, food, childcare. All falling on one person with very little support. What made things harder was what Jamerria was carrying inside. According to court records and statements from her mother, she had a history of mental health problems. She had been diagnosed with PTSD, anxiety, and depression. There were moments of emotional outbursts, unexplained absences, and long periods of silence from her phone. Her mother recalled times when Jamerria would shut down completely, not eating, not talking, just curled up in bed. Friends, though few, had seen her struggle. One person close to the family said she would often complain about having meltdowns and described herself as not okay inside. Still, from the outside, everything looked normal enough. The kids went to school. The apartment was quiet. There were no police visits. No loud arguments. Just a mother and her 2 children behind a closed door. But cracks were forming. Small ones easy to miss. At times, she'd be seen pacing the parking lot alone at night. Once, she stood staring out the window for over an hour while her children played inside. And sometimes she'd lash out at herself. Talking down to herself loudly, blaming herself for things no one else could see. The most heartbreaking part is that no one really stepped in. She wasn't a threat to others until she was. And so life continued, day after day. 2 children holding on to a mother who was quietly slipping into a place few understood and even fewer noticed. In the fall of 2018, something happened that should have changed the course of everything. It started with a smell of smoke and ended with flashing lights and sirens outside a quiet Baltimore apartment. Inside that apartment lived Jamerria Hall and her 2 children Davin and Neria. That day, firefighters discovered that someone had lit objects on fire, family photos, a frying pan inside the unit. But what made it worse was what investigators uncovered next. The smoke detectors had been disabled, and her children were asleep inside when the fire started. Jamerria Hall was arrested shortly after. She later admitted to setting the fire. According to court records, she had done so during what she described as an emotional breakdown. She pleaded guilty to first-degree arson and child endangerment. The court gave her a 5-year sentence, but with all but 1 year suspended. That meant she'd spend just 1 year behind bars, with the rest of her sentence hanging over her, provided she stayed out of trouble. She served her time and was released. But what happened next still baffles many people. After her release, Jamerria regained full custody of her children. The court approved it not because she had shown a full recovery, but because the children's father did not appear for the custody hearing. In the absence of another parent claiming them, custody returned to her. She moved into another apartment with Davin and Neria. The family started over, but not without concern. Jamerria had a documented history of emotional distress. In court, she had openly talked about her mental health. She said she battled anxiety, had trouble staying calm, and often fell into heavy depression. She even described periods when her thoughts would race, and she'd shut down completely. Despite all this, no long-term intervention plan was put in place. No follow-ups. No home checks. No counseling requirements. She had faced a major legal charge involving the safety of her children, but after her release, there was no structured support to guide her return to parenting. Family members noticed her mood swings. One relative mentioned how she would go quiet for days, then suddenly call and speak for hours about things that didn't make sense. Others said she seemed distant, sometimes overly emotional, sometimes totally numb. There were reports filed. At least one social services note from that period mentioned that she was having trouble managing stress and emotions. Yet, the response stopped at documentation. Nothing consistent was done. Her children stayed with her. It's hard to understand how such serious warning signs could go unanswered. But that's what happened. To those outside the walls of that apartment, things looked like they were holding together barely but just enough. August 19, 2021, started like any other day in southwest Baltimore. The weather was warm. The sidewalks were quiet. Outside one of the apartments on Edmondson Avenue, a neighbor saw something they wouldn't forget: Jamerria Hall stepping out of her building with her children. She was holding her daughter's hand. Davin walked a few steps ahead, wearing a small backpack. It was the last time anyone saw them alive. Later that evening, around sundown, a sound echoed from their unit. It wasn't loud enough to draw a crowd, but it was sharp. One neighbor recalled hearing a child yell out, "Mommy, no." That cry was quick, short, then silence. No one knocked on the door. The next morning, nothing seemed out of place. The hallway was still. No police. No broken glass. No signs of anything wrong. Days passed. For it to be exact. But the signs were there if anyone had looked closely enough. Mail began piling up in the hallway. The trash outside her unit hadn't been taken out. Normally, people saw the kids once or twice a week. Playing near the parking lot. Riding scooters. This time, nothing. Not a sound. Not a shadow. The apartment sat quiet. By the fifth day, the smell had started to drift. Not strong at first, but strange. Enough that a building maintenance worker was called in to check it out. August 24th, around mid-morning, he approached the third-floor unit and knocked. No answer. He opened the door. What he found inside froze him in place. The first thing he noticed was the smell. Thick, heavy, and unmistakable. He stepped in slowly and looked around. It didn't take long to realize something terrible had happened. In one of the rooms, tucked inside a blue sleeping bag, lay 8-year-old Davin. There was a visible injury to his chest, and a plastic covering was over his face. His small body was still. Nearby, scattered toys sat untouched. In the bathroom, another discovery brought tears to even the officers who later arrived. 6-year-old Neria was found in the tub. Her head tilted slightly, clothing wrapped around her neck. The water had long drained. The bathroom was quiet and cold. The apartment wasn't torn apart. There were no signs of forced entry. No struggle in the traditional sense. It was eerily calm. A place where childhood once lived, now silent. The maintenance worker stepped back and called for help. Within minutes, first responders arrived. Tape went up around the building. Officers began their investigation. Questions were immediate, but there were no answers. No one knew where Jamerria was. Neighbors gathered outside. Some whispered. Others cried. One woman kept repeating, "I saw them on Thursday. I saw them Thursday." Inside, officers began photographing every room, documenting every item, collecting anything that could explain what happened. It wasn't just the loss that shook them, it was the stillness of the home. As if time had frozen. As if no one was ever coming back. It wouldn't be long before they tracked down the mother. By the next morning, August 25, 2021, Baltimore police had already begun tracking leads. They had no idea where Jamerria Hall was. She wasn't at the apartment. No friends or family had heard from her. Her phone had gone silent. Then just before noon, she was spotted. She was quietly sitting in the back of an Uber riding through the city. The driver had no idea anything was wrong. She hadn't spoken much during the ride. She was calm. She wasn't crying. She wasn't asking questions. When officers pulled the vehicle over, she didn't resist. She stepped out and quietly followed instructions. At the station, detectives began asking questions. That's when she spoke. Without hesitation, she told them what happened. In short, quiet sentences, she confessed. She described how her emotions had overwhelmed her. How she felt pressure building in her mind. How, in her words, she lost control. The officers in that room didn't speak for a moment. They were trained for many things, but this confession left a weight no one could brush off. Jamerria was immediately taken into custody. The charges came quickly. 2 counts of first-degree murder, first-degree assault, reckless child endangerment. The paperwork was filed within hours. News of the arrest spread across local channels by nightfall. Outside her apartment building, people gathered. Some were angry. Some were heartbroken. Most were just trying to understand how this happened. Her mother, devastated, told reporters she had no idea how deep her daughter's pain had become. She thought the worst was behind them. That Jamerria had been trying to heal. That the kids were safe. Investigators went back through the timeline. August 19th, the last confirmed sighting of Jamerria and her children. That night, neighbors heard the scream. Over the next 4 days, the apartment stayed quiet. No lights turned on. No one came out. August 24th, the discovery. August 25th, the arrest. Authorities believe the children were taken from this world on that very first night, the same night the neighbor heard the child yell out. That moment, so quick and so easily overlooked, was now a haunting echo no one could forget. The media coverage took off quickly. Photos of the children smiling in old birthday pictures filled television screens and news feeds. Articles called the case unthinkable. But for those close to the family, it wasn't just tragic. It was heartbreaking in a deeper way. Because some of them had seen the signs. They just didn't know how close the breaking point was. Just over a week after Jamerria Hall was arrested, a hearing was held at the Baltimore City Circuit Court. It didn't take long. On September 3, 2021, the judge made a decision that would change the direction of the case. Jamerria was found mentally unfit to stand trial. This wasn't about whether she was guilty. She had already confessed. The question now was whether she had the mental capacity to fully understand the legal process. Whether she could stand in court and defend herself in a way that was fair and lawful. Doctors had evaluated her and found that her mental condition needed serious treatment. As a result, she was transferred out of jail and into a psychiatric facility for medical care. The case was moved to what's called an inactive docket, where it would remain until doctors determined whether her mental state had improved enough to resume court proceedings. Since then, Jamerria has remained in custody. Every few months, the court checks in on her condition, but so far, nothing has moved forward. She remains under supervision and her case remains paused. Outside the courtroom, though, the impact of what happened was only just beginning. People began asking hard questions. How did this happen? How could a woman who once set fire to an apartment with her children inside regain full custody without oversight? Why weren't the warnings taken seriously? The documented emotional breakdowns. The history of mental struggles. The confession of stress, anxiety, and repeated signs of not coping well. There were reports filed. There were court records. But somehow those red flags weren't enough. The system looked away, or maybe it was never looking in the first place. The Child Protective Services Division in Maryland received public scrutiny. Experts spoke up. Some said the laws made it difficult to act unless there was immediate danger. Others said underfunded departments and high caseloads left too many cracks for families to fall through. This case became more than a headline. It became a mirror. A reminder of how lives can unravel when the help that's needed never arrives. What makes this story even more painful is the time that passed between warning and loss. There were years. Years when anything might have made a difference. This story is not just about what happened inside an apartment. It's about what didn't happen outside of it. It's about silence, missed chances, and a system that didn't see what was right in front of it. 2 children, Neria and Davin, deserved safety. They deserved protection. They deserved to grow up. If their story moved you, or if you believe more people need to hear about the cracks in the system that failed them, please subscribe to this channel. We tell stories that matter, stories that ask hard questions, because ignoring them has a cost. And if you know someone who's struggling, don't look away. Just listen. Stay close. Sometimes the quiet ones are the ones who need help the most. Thank you for watching. Stay safe and stay informed.